In this part, you'll find that you may freely choose what you think, but the result of your thought is governed by an immutable law. Thought results in action. If your thought is constructive and harmonious, then the result is good. If your thought is destructive or inharmonious, then the result is either bad or what we call evil. There is therefore but one law, one principle, one source, one cause. And good and evil are simply words which we have coined to indicate the results of these actions or our compliance or non-compliance to this particular law. It's evident, therefore, that we are to hate nothing, not even bad, because hatred is destructive. And we should soon find that by entertaining destructive thought, we are sowing the wind, and in turn we shall reap the whirlwind. Welcome, guys, to Charles Honnell, the Master Key System. This is Chapter 8, Part 8. And in this chapter, there's a lot of value here. We're going to talk today about the power of imagination, the power of visualization as we continue to really concentrate on our thought processes. Thought contains a vital principle because it is the creative principle of the universe and by its nature will combine with other similar thoughts. Now, this is really key. This is something that most people either have never been taught, don't understand, have never heard. And when I first heard this, I'd heard it a few times before I received it. And then after that, I began to study and understand what it means. You are not your body. You've heard me say this. You have a body. You're not your mind. You have a mind. You are energy in essence, and you vibrate at a certain level. You can vibrate high or you can vibrate low. What happens as a result of you vibrating, you resonate on certain energy levels and you can pull to you certain things. So if you're vibrating high, for example, and you're having really good thoughts, you wake up in the morning and, you're feeling really good and your first experience is something good, perhaps, your favorite breakfast and you had extra $20 in your pocket when you put your pants on. These sorts of things are beginning to happen for you that morning. And you're just thinking really delicious thoughts on the way to your job or on the way to school, drop your kids off, or whatever the case may be. You'll see that more thoughts come to you in like manner. Conversely, if you wake up in the morning and the perpetual hit your toe against the bedpost begins to happen, you're not feeling particularly good. You didn't get a lot of rest. You're in, you picked up that mind pattern from the day before, and you're thinking about the problem that you went to bed last night thinking about. Those sorts of things tend to snowball also. If you listen to Abraham Hicks, she has a wonderful way of describing law of attraction and momentum. She talks about if you have a particular thought for at least 16 to 17 seconds, another thought similar to that will accompany it. And I've tested this, and it is true. It is true, which is why we need to watch our thoughts. Now, Charles Honnell, obviously, the foundation for his teaching is the power of our thoughts. So let's jump back into it. You may freely choose what you think, but the results of your thought is governed by an immutable law. Methods whereby we can substitute habit of constructive thinking for those which have been found to produce only undesirable effects are therefore of primary importance. So what he's saying here, if you take the time to consider what you're thinking, also witness the outcomes. Are they desirable or undesirable? If they're undesirable, then reverse engineer this and say, hey, what are my primary habitual thoughts? How am I producing this time after time? So mental habits are difficult to control, but it can be done. And the way to do it is to begin at once to substitute constructive thought for destructive thought. Form the habit of analyzing every thought. So for me, forming the habit of analyzing every thought was very alien to me when I first heard it, but now it is the epicenter by which I operate. Most people live a sense perception type of existence, meaning if they can't see it, touch it, taste it, feel it, it doesn't exist. And they live in a way where they're only responding to external stimuli, what's out there. Very few people go inward for solutions and inward to reconstruct a model that outwardly can be redefined. And so, I found myself there some years ago. Well, forming the habit of analyzing every thought, I listened to a lot of Eckhart Tolle, and Eckhart indicates that as it relates to people who are conscious versus people who are unconscious, people who are on the path to some level of higher thinking and enlightenment versus those who are not, the distance between these two people is very slim distance, but it is made up of one particular thing, and that is that the people who are on the path, the people who are more conscious, are people who think about their thoughts. Most people think that's probably ridiculous. Think about my thoughts. Most people just think their mind is continually pushing them and motivating them into activity. They never consider that they are not their mind. They never consider they are not their body. They simply respond to an urge for food, urge for alcohol, urge for sex, whatever it is. You've heard me say here a couple times before, and we're going to get back into it, but you have a body, you're not your body. You have a mind, you're not your mind. And again, form the habit of analyzing every thought. That is the way to defeat the ego. That is the way to challenge what you are thinking. Analyze your thoughts. Now, George Matthews Adam was quoted by saying, "Learn to keep the door shut. Keep out of your mind, out of your office, and out of your world every element that seeks admittance, listen, with no definite helpful end in view." How many times are we entertaining information, ideas, conversations that have no definite end, helpful end in view? Well, we could be entertaining ideas, conversations, and information that is desirable instead of undesirable. That is something that we can control. We can control who we talk to. You've heard that you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You don't want to be the smartest of those 3 or 5 friends. If so, you need to find a new 3 or 5 friends. We need to turn off the Real Housewives of this and the Real Housewives of that. All of this that we're listening to via radio, music, or TV, it impacts our thoughts. The imagination will be found to be a great assistance in this direction. The cultivation of the imagination leads to the development of the ideal out of which your future will emerge. Chapter 7, we talked about the imagination being able to cultivate those ideas and just generate material for which it's going to form your desired result. The imagination gathers up the material by which the mind weaves the fabric in which your future is to be clothed. Imagination is the light by which we can penetrate new worlds of thought and experience. Imagination is the mighty instrument by which every discoverer, every inventor opened the way from precedent to experience. Precedent said, I can't do it. Experience said, it's done. Imagination is a plastic power, molding the things of sense into the new forms and ideals. Imagination is the constructive form of thought which must precede every constructive form of action. I also am a huge follower of Neville Goddard, and you've heard me talk about Neville before if you've listened to any of these lectures. Neville has a very specific and unique way of describing who and what he believes the imagination to be, and I'm going to not go into it here, so I don't want to veer off very, very, very far. But I will list the link below where you can reach out via YouTube and just link into some of Neville's teachings, particularly on imagination. Imagination, he believes to be the innate, that human part of you that is actually God. That's where you're having that conversation with the divine. It's where you understand who and what you actually are. Do not confuse imagination with fancy or a form of daydreaming. Daydreaming is a form of mental disposition which may lead to mental disaster. Constructive imagination means mental labor, by some considered to be the hardest kind of labor. But if so, it yields the greatest returns, for all the great things in life have come to men and to women who've had the capacity to think, to imagine, and to make their dreams come true. Now, again, Hanel here goes into great detail to explain the difference between the two, imagination being a more constructive process, which is why the last 2 or 3 weeks, as we have gone into the exercises after the lecture in terms of the imagining of our friends and then the pictures we took in chapter 6, et cetera, listen back to those exercises if you have not done those. Is to strengthen the imagination. Imagination is used to create a very vivid and detailed blueprint of what it is that we want to see as an end result. And we are to revisit that blueprint in our minds multiple times a day, as much as we possibly can, and really see it as clearly as we possibly can, because it conveys to the subconscious, this is where we want to be, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we want to do. And of course, you've heard me say you impregnate that thought with the emotion that goes along with it. How does it feel now that you're able to get into that dress? How does it feel now that you've lost 100 pounds? How does it feel now that you've moved into that new home or you're in that new position? Begin to feel that, impregnate that thought. So imagination is much more of a constructive idea as opposed to just fancy, where you're sitting around and you're letting your thoughts kind of run free. Sometimes they go into places that are fun to think of, but if we're not careful, sometimes they'll take us in places that could lead to what Hanel says here, disaster. When you have become thoroughly conscious of the fact that mind is the only creative principle, that it is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, and that you can consciously come into harmony with this omnipotence through your power of thought, you will have taken a long step in the right direction. Now, the next step is to place yourself in position to receive this power. As it is omnipresent, it must be also within you. There's a Bible verse. It talks about that everything that was made by him and through him and is him. That is what Hanel is speaking of here. This particular source, this wonderful universal power is everywhere all the time at the same time. So therefore, it makes sense that it is also within you. And that also is a concept that a lot of people don't know and therefore don't believe. So they cannot access or acquire the power because they don't have this particular information. They don't realize, they think things are happening to them and not through them or as them. There's a very different paradigms and perspectives. So the power here is to understand that you actually have the power within you. You can change the way you see things when you understand that you can control an outcome. How? Through your thought. Now, we know that this is because we have all power from within, but it must be developed, unfolded, cultivated. In order to do this, we must be receptive. And this receptivity is acquired just as a physical strength is gained by exercise. Now, the law of attraction will certainly and unerringly bring to you the conditions, the environment, and experiences in life corresponding with your habitual, characteristic, predominant mental attitude. What are you habitually thinking about? Buddha, along with many other great spiritual leaders, have said, you become what you think about most of the time. This, again, Hanel is saying in earlier verses, you must consider what you're thinking about. Think about your thoughts. Where are your thoughts today? What is your predominant thought that builds your character and your mental attitude? And we want to, if it's not resulting in desired achievements, we want to change our thoughts. That is the power, that is the value for you today in this particular lecture. Consider your thoughts. You're the observer. You're not your body, you have a body. You're not your mind, you have a mind. You are in the space between the thoughts. You are the observer. Okay? You are the observer. Observe your actions, observe your thoughts. And if the outcomes are not where you want them to be, then change them. Change them to a more constructive mental attitude. Now, all mistakes are but the mistakes of ignorance. Knowledge gaining and consequent power is what determines growth and evolution. This is probably one of the most vast and comprehensive and powerful statements throughout this entire manual. And that is, All mistakes are but mistakes of ignorance. I believe, as general fact, that people at their core are good. That if people are not doing what we consider good things, then they are making bad decisions based on the information they have. And they don't have really good information. You know as well as I do, a lot of people live isolated, some voluntarily, some involuntarily, isolated existence, and they only know what their environment teaches them. They have not done what you're doing today, which is look for additional information. They've not, become a seeker. They're simply responding. They're simply reacting. It's been my experience, and of course, people get very aggressive and very committed to the idea of racism, but most folks who are racist or bigots are not very well traveled. They've not met many people. And there's a fear element there. There's always a fear element there. And it's always of what Hanel is saying, mistakes of ignorance. It's ignorance. Knowledge gaining and consequent power is what determines growth and evolution. This is the whole reason we're all seeking. We're all knocking because we want to gain knowledge, because we know with additional knowledge comes consequent power. And that can determine our growth and our evolution. We want to become our true higher selves. That is the name of this channel, our true higher selves. You are much more than you appear to be. How do you access that higher level of thinking? What is it that Jesus and many of the other enlightened ones knew that perhaps we don't know? We must seek that information in order to get to that level of consciousness, to have that type of effect on our communities. That's ultimately what we want to do. We want to live and be our true higher selves, because we know that being our true higher selves, we have the greatest and most positive impact on those who we come in contact with. Now, the recognition and demonstration of knowledge is what constitutes power. This power is spiritual power. This power is the power which lies at the heart of all things. It is the soul of the universe. Again, Hanel is saying here, you are a piece of the whole. You. And you have the same type of power as the whole has. That soul, that part of you that is tied into everyone else, that is tied into all there is, the omnipotent, the omnipresent, the omniscient, that is where that spiritual power is. You must learn how to access it. Now, this knowledge is the result of man's ability to think. Thought is therefore the germ of man's conscious evolution. When man ceases to advance in his thoughts and ideals, his forces immediately begin to disintegrate, and his countenance gradually registers these changing conditions. It's not very hard to look at people to tell that they are caught up in this mental cesspool of thoughts, or the mind is really wreaking havoc on an individual at a particular time, particularly if you are someone who's on the path or a more conscious person. Now, successful men make it their business to hold ideals of conditions which they wish to realize. This is really a success factor here for us. Successful men and women make it their business to hold ideals of conditions which they wish to realize. Now, irregardless of the condition you find yourself in, where would you like to be? Hold that in your consciousness. Hold that in your thought. Think of wanted, not unwanted. They constantly hold in their mind the next step necessary to the ideal for which they are striving. So there's the blueprint. You have a blueprint, you use your imagination, you've created it. What is the next step? What is the next step? They constantly hold in their mind the next step necessary to the ideal for which they are striving. They do not consider defeat. They do not consider poverty. They only consider abundance. They only consider success. They do not consider failure. If you've been faithful to your ideal, you will hear the call when circumstances are ready. When they're ready to materialize, your plans and results will correspond in the exact ratio of your fidelity to your ideals. In other words, if you continue down this path, now this is a law, if you continue to hold within you your ideals strongly, constructively, it has no other resolve but to manifest. So Hanel is saying here, it will materialize. Your plans will materialize based on the fidelity of your ideal. So in the last part, you created a mental image. You brought it from the invisible into the visible. This week, Hanel, the challenge here is to take an object and follow it back to its origin and see what it really consists of. If you can do this, you can develop imagination, insight, perception, and this will really help you really develop that blueprint and get an idea of where these things originate. Now, for example, take the same position as you did before and visualize a battleship. See the grim monster floating on the surface of the water. There appears to be no life anywhere about. All is sight. You know that by far the largest part of the vessel is under the water, out of sight. Now, follow the great steel plates through the foundry. See the thousands of men employed in the production of this ship. Go still further back. See the ore as it comes out of the mines. See it loaded on barges or cars. See it melted and properly treated. Go back further still and see the architect and the engineers who planned the vessel. Let the thought carry you back still further in order to determine why they planned the vessel. You'll see that you're now so far back that the vessel is something intangible. It no longer even exists. It is now in the intangible, the invisible, the spiritual. And where is your idea? It's in the same place. Your ideal waits there. This wonderful car that you've wanted to drive for so long, this home that you've wanted to live in, this career that you wanted to have, the entrepreneurship, all of that is in that intangible space, no different than the battleship. By going back, we're sort of re-engineering how these things happen. And it also is a comforting fact to know that this is the process that everyone must go through. Everyone must go through this process in order to materialize their desired outcome. Now, you'll find exercises like this very valuable. When the thought has been trained to look below the surface, everything takes on a different appearance. The insignificant becomes significant. The uninteresting, interesting. The things which we suppose to be of no importance are seen to be only really vital things in existence. So your thought is that critical. So again, the power of your imagination. In summary, what is the imagination? It's a form of constructive thought. Now again, separate this from fancy and from daydreaming. Imagination, a form of constructive thought, the light by which we penetrate new worlds of thought and experience, the mighty instrument by which every inventor or discoverer opened the door from precedent to experience. What is the result of imagination? The cultivation of the imagination leads to the development of the ideal out of which your future will emerge. How does imagination differ from daydreaming? Daydreaming is a form of mental disposition, while imagination is a form of constructive thought, which must precede every constructive action. See it first, achieve it next. You must see it to its completion mentally before you can receive it physically. I hope, guys, that you found this very informative. I am really enjoying this lecture series, and join us again next time for Chapter 9. If you're not listening to the prior chapters 1 through 7, please do so and create yourself a playlist. Subscribe to us. Check out the description below. I'm sure we've got some goodies there for you. And until next time, have a productive week.